Hello, today we're going to be talking about the inevitability of death, when two become three, and what's known as the Billy Graham rule. So stay tuned, we have a lot to talk about today. To the program. I'm your host Grant on the book podcast Building on Others' Knowledge. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to our program. Last week I was unable to report a podcast, and the reason was my wife's grandfather passed away unexpectedly, so we had to travel to Elmira, New York to attend a funeral there. Elmira, New York is kind of on the Pennsylvania, New York line, and so we traveled for 14 hours, and so it's not, we traveled all night on Thursday, I think it was, and we drove all day on Monday, so it was a short trip, but it was beautiful country up in there. A lot of fun getting to see my wife's family, some of them for the first time. And it was just really a good experience. I hate the circumstances, but her grandfather's name was Richard. His nickname was Dick Freeman. He passed away, and his funeral was, as I said, this past weekend. He lived actually in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, which was on the Pennsylvania side, but he attended church in Elmira, New York. He and his wife, Christine, had 9 children together. Vern, which is my wife's father, so he's the oldest. And then you had, this isn't in chronological order, but Anita, Nina, Glenn, Grace, Harold, Tom, Stanley, and Roberta. So 9 children, and they were married for 62 years, which is an anomaly, I guess you would say, in in our current society, regrettably so. But it was a joy to just meet the family and really get to hear more stories about Dick. I wish I could have spent more time with him. I do regret that I only met him once. I met him at our wedding. But because of Dick's sudden death, I have been contemplating, death a little bit more. And that's not something we like to think about a lot, but I think it is helpful to a serious contemplation of it. I think it is very helpful for us. And I think you'll see why as I talk for a few minutes here. But in his book, I talked previously about the vanishing American adult. U.S. Senator for Nebraska, Ben Sasse, he makes this point well on why it's important to think about death. And he says this, he says, "Death is the single most obvious fact of life from which we constantly insulate our kids. We have, to our detriment, created a cult of denial about our mortality. Life needs to be lived and prioritized with the understanding that it is limited. An awareness of one's mortality makes life richer because the important can be emphasized and the trivial marginalized." And Sasse continues, he says, "Proximity to death compels one to ask foxhole questions that demand honest answers about life, meaning, relationships, insecurities, priorities, real and neglected. If we recognize that we're going to die someday, the least we can do is prepare to die well." And I think Sasse is correct on a number of points here, and I can attest that we, and not that my parents try to hide me from death, but just as a society, we don't like to think about death. And in my own life, because of medicine, and I haven't known many people who have died at a young age. Life expectancy, the age is a lot higher than it was a couple hundred years ago, so just based on that alone, you don't know as many people that die at a younger age. And because of that, we're not as prone to think about it. I know a handful of people that I would have considered, close to, have had a significant relationship with them that have passed away, and so because of just the lack of, I guess, cases, we don't think about death a lot, and but I do think it's important. And the first part about it is how death is inevitable. It's going to happen whether we, want to admit it or not. Everybody is going to die. And I think we all know this to be true. This isn't something that you have to doesn't have to be proven to you. It's a self-evident truth. Everybody knows he or she is going to die. And in my own life, there are zero counterexamples to refute the inevitability of death. So why should we think that we are going to be the first to overcome death? I think subconsciously, though, we do think that, but we live in a society that strives to forget about the reality of death. We possess a notion of invincibility that contradicts what we know to be true. We live as if we're not going to die, even though we all know deep down we are going to die one day. And that leads to a second prudent observation of Sass, and it is advantageous for us to consider that we will die. If I live my life as if I will never die, I will be more inclined to be selfish. I'll be more inclined to sin more. I'll be more inclined to be lazy. I'll be more inclined to have just my priorities reversed. But we must, especially if you're a Christian, we must understand that we will die. And yes, we are going to spend an eternity in heaven or hell. So in one sense, we are immortal, but not on this earth is not going to be immortal. We're going to obviously have a change. So we're going to live in either heaven or in hell, and how we live on this earth will determine our eternal destiny. I know we're not saved by works. We're saved by faith, by grace through faith, but works are a necessary evidence that you have been saved by grace through faith. And so if works aren't present, if you're not living right, that means you're not saved. So therefore, it is true to say that how we live on this earth is going to determine our eternal destiny. Now, my opinion is that you will be more likely to live for God. You'll be more likely to have your priorities straight, to serve others selflessly, if you grasp this concept that you are going to die. And, we can't afford to buy the subtle lie of our godless culture that death will never come. Just don't be fooled by that. But to be honest, no amount of sermonizing on my part could convince you of the truth that death is inevitable. There is no substitute for seeing death itself, for seeing someone who you were close to, that you loved, that you have memories with. Seeing them die, there's no substitute for that. And once death becomes personal, through the passing of a close friend, a close family member, I think you'll be more sensitive, at least for a time, to the things of God, and don't squander that precious opportunity for God to work a mighty transformation in your life. And maybe it's not salvation that needs to take place. Maybe it's just a better prioritizing of your life. You recognize that at death, you see death in its eyes. What is really important? What's going to matter? Playing video games, or spending time with your family and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think if we start to think about that, as Sass noted, we do start to ask those foxhole questions. What is life all about? Is my life important? Do I have purpose? Do I have meaning? Does God exist? And if God exists, who is He? How can I be reconciled to this God? Am I a sinner? There's so many foxhole questions that we should ask if we realize the fact that we are not invincible, that death is inevitable, we are going to die, and we better make wise preparations for that. So two other things today I'm going to talk about is my called the Billy Graham Rule, and then a book entitled When Two Become Three. But the Billy Graham Rule. So my October issue of Christianity Today came in the mail this week, and so I've been thumbing through that and reading it. And there's a number of good articles in there, but there's one section that Christianity Today has that I really kind of like. It's like short paragraphs about news from the world. around the world that you don't necessarily hear all that much about. But it's just really insightful. Like, I learned. I think I knew this from somewhere, but like the Assemblies of God just elected a woman to a high leadership position. I think it's like the third most powerful position in the Assemblies of God, and that's just interesting. There's various sociological reasons. Just there's a bunch of different things behind that. But the Billy Graham rule, there was something mentioned about that, and I'm just going to read the article and just kind of discuss it briefly. But it was entitled. The paragraph was entitled, "Deputy Files Billy Graham Rule Lawsuit." A former deputy sued the Lee County, North Carolina Sheriff's Office, alleging he was terminated for following the Billy Graham rule. Manuel Torres objected to the extended one-on-one time required for training a female deputy and requested a religious exemption, saying his faith as a Baptist forbids him from spending significant time alone with a woman besides his faith. While adherents say the Billy Graham rule protects marriages, critics worry it limits opportunities for women and distorts views of the opposite sex. On my initial reaction to this is, good, finally, somebody that's, understanding the importance of preserving their purity and not indulging in sexual immorality. And just because you spend one-on-one time with a woman, I'm not saying you have to, but it's just, that's wisdom there. That to me, that's wise understanding. And one thing, it protects you from false accusations that could come against you. I think that was one of the reasons why Billy Graham did that in the first place, is if you're ever alone, even if it's for a brief time alone with a woman, and most people aren't, I guess, have homosexual tendencies, so it's not as necessary to be alone with a man, but be alone with a woman. What if a woman comes forward and says that, Billy Graham touched me inappropriately, or he made unwanted sexual innuendos, or whatever it is, well, that's false, because I have a second witness who was there when you're saying this took place, and he's refuting your claim. But Manuel Torres, I applaud him for standing up for, I don't think my wife would want me spending a significant time alone with another woman one-on-one, and I wouldn't want to put myself in that kind of position. So I think it's wise. And what the critics say about it limits opportunities for women, so take it for what it's worth. But why does a woman have to be? I'm not, I want to be cautious here, but why is it necessary for a woman to be a police officer? And how exactly does that distort views of the opposite sex by saying that certain jobs probably aren't catered to women? I think that is a representation of where our society is, that we have in certain regards made women more masculine and made men more effeminate. But I just think that was an interesting story, something to think about, and just to meditate on, and just see kind of a snapshot of parts of our culture, and it's just interesting to think about. The final thing that I'll be talking about today is Mark Crawford. I just read a book by him. Actually, my wife and I read this book, When Two Become Three. And obviously, the book is about parenting, or kind of marriage in light of parenting. So preparing for the challenges that will come with welcoming a newborn into your house, your first one. So when two become three. And but the book is, as I said, has kind of a slight twist. So so let me say that again. You're preparing for the challenges that come with transitioning from being a spouse, although you will still be a spouse, to your new role as a parent. And Crawford notes this. He says, several studies indicate that having children can, in fact, be a stressful transition and can actually result in increased conflict for a couple and a decrease in overall marital satisfaction. He continues with what is, in my opinion, the main theme of the book. He says, the arrival of a newborn presents an intense and often unrecognized threat to a marriage. Now, threat's kind of a strong word, but don't misunderstand me and listen to me the entire way out. Having a child is a tremendous blessing from God. I think every life is important, especially the life of your own child, and so having a child has been a tremendous blessing. It's added, it adds more joy and more delight into your life. And on May 22nd, when Aiden was born, how proud I was of just to be a dad, and it's a wonderful, wonderful blessing. But having a child is a life-changing event. It completely rocks your world in ways that if you haven't had a child, you really can't understand fully. And as Crawford points out, the threat that this poses, and the word threat is kind of strong, but that's the word he uses, is often unrecognized, meaning you're not really prepared for it. The inability to consider how bringing a child into your family is going to alter permanently the structure and functioning of the family, I think that probably contributes to the problem. So when you don't consider how it's going to impact your relationship with your wife, it doesn't have to be negative, affect it negatively. It's just a realization that your relationship will be altered. If it's not, I mean, the baby does not take care of itself. He is completely dependent upon his or her parents, and that's just an obvious fact. So if you don't recognize that, I think it's going to contribute to the problem. Now, Crawford seeks to make parents in the book. This is why the book is great. He wants to make parents or soon to be parents aware of the impending threat to their marriage that having a child poses. And he cites some studies to support his contention. And I just want to give a couple of those kind of that data to support what he's saying here. In their book, When Partners Become Parents, The Big Life Change for Couples, Cohen and Cohen report that a 10-year longitudinal study of couples showed that 92% of new parents described more conflict and disagreement after they had a baby than prior to becoming parents. The same longitudinal study of well-functioning couples having a first baby showed that 12.5% had separated or divorced by the time their first baby was 1.5 years old. Okay, that's pretty 92%. So that's vast majority of new parents described more conflict and more disagreements. The research of Belsky and Kelly, who in their book, The Transition to Parenthood, observed that marital conflict increases by a factor of 9 after the birth of the first child. So, according to these two books, this research, becoming a parent can potentially threaten the vibrancy and unity of a marriage. But why? What exactly about becoming a parent contributes to this supposed threat? And, while a comprehensive treatment of Crawford's book, I think, is beyond the scope of the podcast, it might be interesting to consider just a few reasons, what are the contributing factors that Crawford mentions? And I think he mentioned, I'm going to go through a couple of these. For starters, becoming a parent means that there's just going to be more to disagree about. That's one of the points. There's going to be more to disagree about. When it was just you and your spouse, you did not have to mutually decide upon a girl's name. You didn't have to decide all the potential names out there. You didn't have to decide upon a first name, middle name, or you didn't have to determine if your kid would be a vegetarian, or if you would allow him to eat meat. And I'm using these just as examples. You can add a lot more to this, or or choose if he would get an allowance for his chores, or if he would just have to do them because he's part of the household and his chore is being allowed to sit at the table and eat. Or agree if mom's going to stay home with Junior and take care of him, or if you expect her to continue working and Junior goes off to daycare all day. Those are decisions you did not have to make prior to becoming a parent. But now that you become a parent, there's more decisions to make, and therefore there's going to be more disagreement because you're just two different people. And these decisions are rendered all the more important to you since it is your son and daughter. Okay? It is your son and daughter. And I just thought about this, and I want to insert this right here. Because some people have the idea, and when they're looking for a spouse or something like that, they have the idea that there's one individual in the entire world that is just right for them, and that's their quote soul mate. That they have to marry that individual to find eternal bliss, and if they marry anybody else, it's going to be complete devastation, or at very least, it's just not going to be as good as if they found their soulmate. And this kind of image has been popularized by probably a lot of the romantic movies of Hallmark and just different things. And it's a false notion, I do think, that there's one individual that you can marry that will bring you eternal happiness. And the reason is, I think the problem behind that, though, is if you think that and then you get married and then you start to have conflict, especially after you have a kid, what are you going to start thinking? Well, I must not have married the right person. And then you're going to be more likely to abort the relationship than if you realize that conflict is inevitable in a marriage, and especially a marriage with children. It's just inevitable. It doesn't have to be throwing pots and pans at each other. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about conflict in general, just some disagreements. And if you're not aware of that, and you have this false notion of a soulmate that you're never going to have conflict with, if you do start to have conflict with this person you marry, my humble opinion is you're going to start to think, what, did I marry the right person? I had this notion that I wasn't going to have any conflict, and now I'm having conflict. Isn't the only logical conclusion that I didn't marry my soulmate? I just wanted to insert that right there. Is conflict is going to be inevitable. So if you have conflict in your relationship, that's not, it's inevitable, but you can work through it. Anyways, I just wanted to insert that because I hear people talk about that sometimes, and I just think that's ridiculous. No two people are going to be absolutely perfect for each other, and with no problems or issues whatsoever. Okay, it's going to happen. Every two individuals on this planet are different in some regard, and it's going to take work. And but that's, to me, that's fun, trying to work at it. But anyways, so the decisions that you're making about the child, they're more important to you because it is your child. And Crawford, I think, humorously makes the point. He says, disagreement about your child can take on the feel of a Supreme Court decision that will determine the course of history for generations to come. When it's your child, that decision is a lot more important to you than if it's a decision made by another parent about not even your kid. Another factor that Crawford says affects the marriage is that there's going to be a decrease in amount of shared leisure time. And he mentions the research of John Gottman, who discovered that in his research a pervasive attribute of marriages in which both couples express a great deal of contentment is that the relationship is based on a deep friendship. And that's what he defines a deep friendship as: mutual respect and enjoyment of each other's company. Kind of like what was happening when you were dating. And because your focus will be primarily on taking care of your child, unless you are careful and unless you are intentional opportunities like walking together, spontaneously outside on an afternoon, or, talking about the events of the day, or just going to the mall on a whim just to spend time together, it's going to pass you by. And the deep friendship you'd forged previously can be in danger of being pulled apart. And so you have to be careful. You have to be intentional, because it's going to be the natural drift. The shared leisure time together is going to be a possibility to disappear into oblivion. So you have to be careful. Now, as I said, Crawford's book is very interesting, helpful, and most importantly, it's practical. And knowing that having a child can be a threat to your marriage, again, this isn't your child's fault, like he's a devil child whatsoever. And it doesn't imply that having children is a drudgery. It's a great blessing. It just means that it can hurt your marriage if you're not cautious and deliberate. Okay, don't think that I'm against having children, because I'm really not. I plan to have more with my wife. But it's a potential threat to the marriage that, unless you're careful, it could be more catastrophic, and you just gotta be careful. So knowing that having a child can be a threat to your marriage, I think it's a good start toward rectifying the wrongs that maybe you've already committed, or preparing for the arrival of your first child. Make preparations. If you are a soon-to-be parent, make preparations now, about this. And I would encourage you to pick up this book. It's a great book. And if you are a soon-to-be parent, or if you plan to have a child in the future, near future, far future, don't be fooled into thinking your life will just be the same. Okay, that's a false. It's just a lie. It's not true. It's going to radically transform your life in a good way. As I said, not necessarily in a negative way. If you allow it to be negative, it can be negative. But it can also be positive, and it can change you as an individual, make you more patient, make you more loving, make you more caring and considerate. I think there are great benefits, character development that can come with being a parent, but it's also a potential threat that you need to be careful about. So I really enjoyed the thesis of Crawford's book, and I think I learned a lot from it, and hopefully I can apply it better. So that was when 2 become 3. But thank you for listening once again to the book podcast. I'm endeavoring once again to try to shorten it to right about 30 minutes. And I don't want to wear anybody out talking on the book podcast. But thank you for listening. I got a number of books that I'm excited to read coming up. And I'm trying to just read as much as I can. I enjoy reading books. And thank you for listening, though. Once again, I hope you yourself are inspired to go pick up a book and read. It's a great blessing to be able to read. And if you in English, we have a plethora of books, and abundance. And you are missing out on a tremendous opportunity if you don't read a book. I was listening to the radio the other day, and I think this was from the Pew Research, but they said that 27% of Americans, this is, to me, grievous, 27% of Americans last year did not either read a book, or they didn't even read part of a book. So 27% of Americans, and if my intuition is accurate, I actually think the number is probably higher than that. But they said 27% of Americans never even opened a book to start reading it, read a part of a book, or didn't even read a book at all. And I think that's terrible. And hopefully from this podcast you're inspired to go read more and learn more about God's great world, about the people of the world, and for the purpose of becoming a better servant in His kingdom. So thank you for listening to the program. And I hope you have a good week in the Lord, and God bless.